taking apart a computer. The first thing you'll want to do when taking apart a computer is look at the case that you have. What you're looking for is some way to get into the computer case. If we notice on the side here, we have some buttons. If we push both buttons in and roll the case forward towards yourself, you will now be able to open up the computer. One thing to look for, inside some of your cases, you're going to find information about the motherboard, PCI slots, where you can plug in your hard drive, RAM, and power supplies. This piece of paper in here is very useful in terms and helping when it comes to putting your computer together or taking it apart. Once you've removed the lid off your computer, the next thing we have to do is ground ourselves. We want to make sure that we do not discharge any static electricity and destroy or fry any of the electrical equipment. The best way to do this is by doing the Chicado lean. The Chicado lean, quite simply, is leaning forward and touching the metal case part of your system. By doing this, any free-flowing electrons are now grounded from me, and I hopefully will not be able to use static electricity to fry any of the equipment. The next thing we're going to look at is the internals of the computer. What we see here is a power supply. We're definitely not going to want to touch this. There are some dangerous components in there. We have a whole bunch of cables which are connected to a floppy drive. We have a hard drive connected underneath it, which we'll take out shortly. We have a CD-ROM drive as well. On the motherboard itself, which is the blue square that you can see here, we have a fan and a heatsink, which sit on top of the CPU. The role of the fan and the heatsink is to pull any excess heat while the computer is running. One of the first things we'll want to do when we're taking our computer apart is working on the CD-ROM drive. To remove the CD-ROM drive from this computer, all you do is lift the CD-ROM drive towards you. If the wires get in the way and prevent you from pulling it out, pull out the connecting wires. You'll find 2 or 3 of them possibly. The small one on the end is audio sound. The multicolored plug is going to be power, and the IDE cable is what connects the CD-ROM drive into the motherboard. Once you remove that, it's simply just pulling up on the CD-ROM drive, removing it, take it and put it to the far right-hand side. We're going to lay all of our components out from right to left, so that way when we put it back together, we just have to go from left to right. The next thing I want to take out is going to be my hard drive and floppy drive. Once again, I lift it up. I'm going to remove the power cables. Pull straight out when you're removing power cables. Same thing with data cables. Pull straight out. If you have to wiggle a little bit, you can. But you want to definitely pull straight out. This way you're not bending any of the pins. We'll do the same thing for the hard drive, and we'll remove the power supply for the hard drive. Once that's removed, it's just a matter of tilting it, lifting it up, and now I have the hard drive on the bottom, my floppy drive on the top. I'm going to put that beside my CD-ROM drive. Now that I've removed the drives, I can actually start to see the motherboard and the cables more clearly. So I have 3 cables. One was for the floppy drive, so I'm going to remove that from the motherboard. It is the smaller one of the 2. You'll notice that the floppy drive cable is significantly smaller. We're going to take that, plug that into the back of our floppy drive. Now to plug it in, I need to make sure that I line up the notch on the bottom of the cable with the notch on the back of the drive. If you don't do that, they will not go in. And whenever you're putting it in, just put it in gently, line it up. You might have to flip it over. line up your notches, and then push it in straight by itself. This way, I now know that this connection belongs to the drive. The other two cables that we're going to look at are going to be our CD-ROM and our hard drive. If you look closely inside, you're going to notice that beside the blue connector, it says primary ATA. That means that this blue plug is for the hard drive. My hard drive is my primary connection. The black connection at the back here is a secondary IDE cable connection. So that is going to be for my CD-ROM drive. The computer uses the hard drive more than the CD-ROM drive. That's why the hard drive is primary and the CD-ROM drive is secondary. If we look at the front here, we'll actually see the word floppy. Floppy tells me that this connection is where the floppy drive is going to be. So now that I have my two cables, my one for the CD-ROM drive, one for the hard drive, I'm going to plug them back into their appropriate devices. Once again, I'm going to look at the back. I'm going to make sure that the notch is matched up with the notch in the plastic, and then put the two parts in together and gently slide that in. So now I know this connection will end up going into here when I'm ready to put it back together. And we're going to do the same thing with the hard drive. I'm going to line up the notches to the notch on the back of the drive and plug it in. And now that's connected as well. The next thing we're going to want to do is unplug the power supply from the motherboard. In order to do that, there's a little notch on the side that you have to push in. So you push in the latch and pull straight forward to remove the drive, the plug for the power supply. Once I've done that, I've now exposed the random access memory. In order to remove the RAM, you're going to want to open up the latches, and you're going to notice that the RAM will pop up a little bit. There's the one side, and that one it popped up again. When removing RAM, we always grab the center of the RAM, pulling straight up. Do not touch the gold. The oil on your fingers, if you touch the gold part of the RAM, will actually destroy the connections. So when we're handling RAM, we have to be very careful. Put it down on the table nicely. We'll now do the same thing with the second one. So I remove the arms, it pops the RAM up, I grab from the center, I pull straight up, being sure once again not to touch the gold part of the connectors and putting it down. At this point, we could remove the CPU, but there's a whole bunch of screws, so we're not going to bother with this system. That's something we can do on another system. But you can actually see that most of the computer is now bare. At this point now, you switch partners, and the one person who took it apart is going to stand beside the other person who hasn't, and that one person's now going to put it back together. Why don't we stop, and then we'll